Welcome into another edition of the Cubs Now podcast. I'm your host, Lance Brazdowski, alongside my co-host, Alex Cohen, fresh off a call of a pretty exciting weekend series against the Twins with the 2016 reunion. We'll talk about this Cubs team, which is trending in the positive direction, especially with Alex Bregman getting going. We'll recap a very pitcher-heavy MLB draft and some deadline notes that are already floating around as we're about 2 weeks out of that fateful August 3rd day where the Dodgers play the Cubs. The Cubs play the Dodgers on that deadline day. Alex, how are you, my friend?
Doing great. Obviously, a really fun 2016 reunion weekend, and it was capped off in proper fashion. They win the series against the Twins. They lose the first game, win the next two, and they were able to send off everybody home happy and really capped off a nice weekend.
No doubt. Yeah, we want to focus on that for a second. The Champions Gate unveiling was really cool ceremony emceed by our very own Cole Wright. Did a fantastic job. It was great to hear from Joe Madden, Anthony Rizzo off the cuff. Like just a lot of good memories, good vibes. And we got the best vibe of potentially ever. This is something that's going to be, I don't know, there's certain times, Alex, when you're watching a game and you see a moment and you like kind of think that moment maybe is going to be replayed for a very long time. Anthony Rizzo almost catching this Michael Busch home run ball is a moment that will be re-racked, I think, for the eternity of Marquee Sports Network and Cubs history. It's such a wild moment. I mean, Boog was exasperated on the broadcast, so was Depp. It was just so wild that this happened. You know, there's a bunch of, this is a friends and family section in the bleachers, so you had Hayward and Dex there. Chris Coghlan was right next to him. David Ross was off to his left. Like, it's a crazy serendipitous moment. He's holding his kid. And, of course, this is weird because Moises Ballesteros last year hit a home run right at him when Rizzo was in the bleachers another time. So when you saw this, did you think that it was fabricated by AI or something? I mean, this is just an unbelievable moment.
I was shocked. I mean, you can't really draw it up, scripted any better than that. And I think the context that you provided was really important. When he was here last season, he was being honored. He's in the bleachers. Moises Ballesteros hits the home run to him, and he drops it, and everybody gives him a lot of grief. And then he has this with Michael Busch, home run to the first baseman of the past from the first baseman of the present and the future. And, he had a kid in one hand and he got the ball in the other. And, while there's some discrepancy on whether he caught it or he didn't, or if it was a botch or if it wasn't, he still ended up with the ball and the ball in one hand and the baby in the other that day with Kyle Hendricks, Ben Zobrist, Jason Hayward, Dexter Fowler out, as you can see. Like, it doesn't get better than that.
It's unbelievable. This is kind of the roll call we showed on our believe our postgame show and also tweeted it out, just popping around and showing Trevor Kale. Just so many people there. We only highlighted 8 of them, but I imagine there's a bunch of other. I think Eric Hinsky's right behind David Ross as you're looking on your screen right now. Just such an unbelievable moment. You had Demp in the booth Sunday. What did he have to say about it? Was there anything that he kind of pointed out that kind of stuck out to you?
Well, I mean, he made it clear that he kind of called it, Dempstradamus, saying like something special is going to happen today, and it just so happened that half inning. So he really enjoyed it. It was really cool hearing Demp talk about that because even though he wasn't on that 2016 team, he was part of the present and the future of that Cubs fabric in 2012 when he was teammates with Travis Wood and Anthony Rizzo, then 2013 with the Red Sox where he was teammates with David Ross and John Lester. Like, he has so many inroads on that team. He was really able to paint the picture of what they were feeling and Cubs fans were feeling and former Cubs players were feeling. And I think that moment in particular kind of just brought everything together. So you could tell how happy and how joyous he was and how the players were.
No doubt. And this Cubs team, too, has been playing pretty well. They take 2 or 3 from the Twins. They get a nice little 3-pack against the Tigers and then a weird in-betweener game. I believe it's against the Blue Jays coming up here, or that might be in another week or two.
Well, the Blue Jays will be after it'll be in early August. But, I mean, you have 2 AL Central teams who you only play 3 times over the course of the season, and 2 teams that are in interesting spots as you go towards the trade deadline. You have the Twins who are, after this series, are 2 games under 500, but they're a game out of a wild card spot, and the Tigers, who were so bad at the beginning of the regular season, they're now 2.5 games back of a wild card spot. So you have 2 teams that are in interesting spots, and they go to this series at Wrigley Field. The Tigers, you could sense like if they win 2 out of 3, they're probably going to buy. If they lose 2 out of 3 or are swept, they're probably going to sell. So it's an interesting part of the season too.
And they have 2 of the probably most sought after, if you remove Freddie Peralta, pitchers in this deadline class, at least as we know. Of course, there's always names that kind of float up late, but the bigger rentals are Tarik Skubal and Casey Mize. It's still TBD. I feel like I see a tweet every week here coming up as to whether they actually end up trading one of these guys. We're going to talk a little deadline in the second half of the show. I did want to talk Alex Bregman, though, who has been heating up. I mean, this was the name, I think, throughout the season that we were kind of waiting for to get going. You had basically 3 months of play where he was slugging below 400 on pitches over the middle of the plate, which is always kind of the cheat way I look at his production, just because hitters like him are so successful on mistakes, pitches middle. And he has 3 home runs. I believe this would be 5 games now.
5 games. Yeah, dating back after the All-Star game. Yeah, it was the 2 home runs in Cincinnati and then the home run today. So now he has double-digit homers, and you need Alex Bregman, especially if you're going to hit him third or fourth or second to do that type of damage. That was an elevated breaking ball from Zebby Matthews. And like when Alex Bregman's going well, he's hitting that pitch out. Alex Bregman's going well, and he hits that pitch, 10 rows into the seats? Well, actually 5 rows into the seats. You got to be accurate. So,
yeah, it's impressive. I mean, how big would it be for them to have him clicking? Because we did the State of the Union was our last episode. I encourage you to check that out on wherever you get your podcast or YouTube. If you didn't listen, that was kind of our first half recap of sorts, digging into various trials and tribulations of this team, the pitching injuries, but also how strong they've been offensively. How important would it be for Bregman to be like, even if it's a 110 to 115 WRC plus, like being a 10 to 15% above average hitter from a runs created standpoint would be massive, because this team is already like the second or third best offense in baseball without him being a league average hitter. So to me, it's like, even if some of the other guys slow up, like let's say Pete doesn't have as torrid of a first half, say he's like very good in the second half, you would be able to supplement basically all the lost production, quote unquote, with Alex Bregman just being a bit above average, which he hasn't been. So, I mean, I've been really encouraged by his swings of late. And to me, it just comes down to middle of the zone. Like, he crushes balls over the heart of the plate. And he had a lot of balls that he was either popping up or pounding into the ground the first 3 months of the season. And the mistakes that he's seen in his last 5 games, he's hit out. And that is the difference between him slugging, 500 plus that he has in his career on 4-seamers and fastballs versus the sub 400 mark we've had this season, which to me, again, is really like the primary thing to point out as to where he's kind of regressed, so to speak. But we're already seeing a turnaround.
I think for me, I mean, there's 3 hitters in this Cubs lineup that are X factor. If you turn them around from a struggle in the first half to the second half, it really changes the entire compass of this Cubs lineup. And it's Nico Hoerner, Michael Busch, and Alex Bregman. If I were to rank them based on if they get hot, how good is this Cubs offense going to be? Michael Busch is probably my one, because he has legitimate 30 home run, 100 RBI power, getting on base at a 370 clip with him being able to draw walks. I think the power potential from Busch, if he does get hot, he can carry an offense. I think Bregman would be my 2 and Nico Hoerner would be my 3. So I think he's settled, number 2 in that mix of 3 guys who I think could be genuine X factors here in the second half, or technically after the All-Star break, since we are in the second half for quite some time.
And I'm always going to go with Seiya as kind of my X factor, because I do think they get on base so much as a team. They're so passive from a drawing walk standpoint, which is productive. It's one of the reasons why they grade out from all the advanced metrics as one of the best lineups in baseball. But Seiya is always the guy. You put runners on in front of him, he needs to barrel the ball. Like, if he's slugging around that 450 to 500 clip that we've seen him do for long stretches, I think that's how you start to put up eight runs a game, 7 runs a game for a small stretch. So he's always my guy. But I think to the point, we're bringing up like 4 or 5 hitters on this team that could be X factors. That is, I think, a testament to how good this team is from an offensive production standpoint, and how much I think they need some of the reinforcements back from a pitching standpoint, which is where I wanted to transition to. Jesse Rogers had a pretty good tweet from a Craig Counsell scrum the other day, kind of aggregating a bunch of updates on pitching injuries here. I just got a lot going on. It's one of those days where you're like, it's an injury day. I think at least an in-game hit here. Also, shout out to Elise for doing a great job with the in-game interviews during that 2016 celebration game on Saturday. I thought she crushed it with everybody. Brought really good energy. And again, this is one of those ones where you're like reading off a note card and you're like, I have like 8 pitching injury updates for you. I think she did this hidden game. And so we got Jameson Taillon. I believe he is starting Monday. I was actually talking to him in the clubhouse right after Sunday's game, and I'm kind of interested to see if he makes any mix changes. Reminder that he is a free agent at the end of the year, so he has a ton of incentive to pitch well down the stretch here to convince teams looking at him, potentially the Cubs in the offseason, that he is as good as he was, say, 2 years ago, or even a bit at times last year. Homie Milner has been hopping around the clubhouse. Non-pitching injury here, the appendicitis, I think is a positive trend. Edward Cabrera, seen him around as well. The second week of August is kind of more of an update we're expecting there. Daniel Palencia is probably the most, I won't say bad news, but just, you hope that he was further along than he has been. It's being pushed more to a mid-August timeline now. Before I ask you on targets of like, hey, which, or actually, let me just hit you with now, like, which, I feel like it's Cabrera, but in terms of all these guys coming back, how much does that upgrade their staff, which for the most part is the crux of this team from let me project them in a 5-game or 7-game series against a better team. You kind of trying to figure out, okay, what is the starting pitcher matchups? Because you're confident the offense could hit, but you're really struggling, I think, to find who's like the frontline ace. And especially if the team they're facing is good versus left-handed pitching, how do you stagger Shota and Matthew Boyd, who feel like the one
who've been really good? Yeah, I mean, I think that Shota and Boyd, Shota pitching like his 2024 self, Boyd pitching like his 2025 self in his last handful of starts. I think that makes things a little bit easier when it comes to Edward Cabrera getting back, Jameson Taillon. Those are starting pitching reinforcements. My big one is the Palencia one. Like, he needs to be back. He needs to be good. If not, if they're forecasting a middle of August, end of August, come back, and then he has to gear back up, they need high leverage relievers, in my opinion. So I think that will help forecast. That will transform what they do at the deadline based on how Daniel Palencia, feels in step 1 of his recovery, step 2 of his recovery, step 3 of his recovery. I think that's the biggest one for me.
I agree. Jacob Webb has done a really good job. I think that he stepped up, but I don't think at the beginning of the season, if you said like, hey, Jacob Webb is going to save 30 games for your 25 games, he's probably charting for a little less than that. But if he's the guy, you've kind of be like, what happened to the bullpen, And I think that the power of adding a leverage reliever at the deadline or getting a Palencia back is really just you push good arms to spots where they can succeed more, and you stop having to use more weak arms in that, what I call like the tweener role, where it's like third time through, you pull the starter in the playoffs. Now you need 2 relievers to get you to your 7, 8, 9. Like, those guys are really important. And on teams where you lose your 8th or the 9th inning guy, everyone gets moved into more leverage spots. So the ability to use a Jacob Webb in the 8th or the 7th or something along those lines, get Hobie Milner back, use him as your lefty killer in the 7th or 8th, instead of using those guys in the 8th or 9th, is huge. And that's why I agree with you on Palencia. My question is, like, how complex do you think it is from a decision-making standpoint for the front office to not have like clarity when you get to the deadline? If Mason Miller's on the table with the Padres, as it's been speculated, that'd be an amazing addition. Does your willingness to go pay for Mason Miller depend on whether Palencia is presently healthy? You're not going to know. Like, you're not going to have an expected date by that August.
But to me, Mason Miller is a unicorn when it comes to that. If he's available and like the price is in the right direction, doesn't matter if Daniel Palencia is healthy or not, you try to go get him. I would imagine the price will be very steep, considering the price to get him in San Diego was really steep. But yeah, I mean, it also just depends it has been rumored for a long time the Cubs are looking for starting pitching reinforcements. Well, if you get Jameson Taillon back and healthy, if you get Edward Cabrera back and healthy, and he's slated to come back early in August and not late in August, and Shota Imanaga's pitching well, and Matthew Boyd's pitching well, are you going to go out there and try to get a Logan Webb, Joe Ryan, Freddie Peralta if they're available? I mean, I think the answer is still yes. But now you still have a fair amount of starters. Like, you're starting to get healthy. You're not getting more injured, and it makes the calculus a little different than it was, say, 3 weeks ago.
No doubt. We bled some of the deadline stuff into this first half because I just think it's so prevalent to this team over the next couple of weeks. But after the break, we will talk more deadline stuff. Hang with us. Back here on the Cubs Now podcast, Lance Brozdowski alongside Alex Cohn. We're talking deadline. We teased it in the first half of this, and yes, it is a very important moment. You got 2 weeks until that August 3rd deadline. The Dodgers are at Wrigley Field for that day. We'll have you covered here on Marquee if anything happens in our pregame show and also in-game. I believe the deadline time is like right around our pregame as well, so it's a beautiful serendipity there in terms of how things line up. And I think that we have to talk about some of the bigger arms available. This is the time where you're getting a lot of the rumor mill tweeting going on. So you got Heyman, you got Nightingale pointing out a lot of things. This was a little aggregation from Underdog on John Heyman's notes. Tarik Skubal seems much more likely to stay due to Tigers' increased postseason chances, Rays, Cubs, Braves among possibilities if he's traded. I see the Cubs in there. That makes me excited. Cubs like Freddie Peralta. Yankees don't see him in Peralta. And then Angels expected, little typo there, on Jose Soriano is also available. Seems like Reed Detmers also floated as well. A lot of names kicking around here, Alex. We're going to have a big trade deadline show at some point here on the Cubs Now podcast, but your initial lean on who they should acquire, do you have a favorite or two?
I mean, I don't think they're going to acquire Tarik Skubal because I don't think he's going to get traded. I know you and I have differentiating opinions on that, different opinions on that. Maybe I don't know what the proper English is, but I think that he stays. I think that the Tigers still have an opportunity to win that division. Again, they come to Chicago, and if they take 2 out of 3, then they're running. If they lose 2 out of 3, maybe they're dealing him. I know that you think they should deal Skubal. I don't think he gets dealt. If I'm the Cubs, you have to take inventory of when Edward Cabrera is going to be back. Will he be back in early August? And if he's going to be back later in August, that's a big factor there. For me, I think Freddie Peralta would probably be top choice based on how much he's due, what they're looking for, the possible trade connection between the Cubs and the Mets, the familiarity with Craig Counsell, with Peralta and Counsell both in Milwaukee. He'd probably be my number one. I mean, if Logan Webb's available, if Joe Ryan's available, sure, absolutely. But I don't think they would be. I mean, Jose Soriano is somebody who I like a lot. But when it comes with dealing with the Angels for controllable players, I mean, they might ask for the top 10 prospects in the Cubs system. So I'd be interested to see what the Angels would ask for. But if you say, hey, who are they looking at right now? Who's going to be the best offer to for who? It'll be to the Mets for Freddie Peralta. That'd be my guess.
Yeah, I do think the Peralta connection there makes a lot of sense. I'm interested to see. I agree with you on the Angels. Is what I've heard as well from talking to people in the industry. Is just their prices on guys in the last couple deadlines and even in the offseason have just been insane. It's basically non-starter stuff on even a guy like Reed Detmers, who I really like. But I am curious. During the draft cycle, John Mozeliak came in and kind of handed the reins over to their scouting director, and there was some verbiage around the scouting director saying that Mozeliak just gave people independence. And I'm wondering whether he kind of spurs some change that perhaps Perry Manassian wasn't able to spur with that team, where he comes in and he's like, no, we have to trade these guys. We currently have the worst record in baseball. What are we doing? You know what I mean? And maybe in the past, Perry didn't really have that, I guess you could call it angst to make deals. But I agree with you. If Soriano and Detmers, if their prices become more reasonable, it's controlled starting pitching, So it's going to be chunkier. It's going to be like the Shane Baz trade. You're also at a point in time where the recent draft picks, I don't believe, can be traded, which is a little funky. So I think that these trades generally happen in the offseason, and that's kind of where I go back to Logan Webb as well. My theory is always that during the draft cycle, teams obviously have favorites that they do not draft. And then because we don't get a lot of data sample on guys from the draft, maybe they'll throw one starter a couple innings before they shut down, or the guy will get 2 weeks at low A before things end. Models that teams use to value players don't really update with any new data. So I think the probability of having large discrepancies on draft talent is high, such that when you get to the, November timelines and such, that's when you start to get these, we really like this guy and we're fine to trade him for Logan Webb or Reed Detmers or these other guys who are controlled. So I would be surprised if controllable pitching is traded, and that's kind of my reasoning behind it. But I agree with you. There are a lot of avenues the Cubs could go. Bob Nightingale also mentioned Robbie Ray in a piece where he talked about how 2016 for the Cubs specifically is a reminder to act at the deadline. Obviously, the Cubs went out there and got Aroldis Chapman for a package that included Gleyber Torres, who at the time was their top prospect. I'd be kind of interesting if the Cubs mimic that trajectory and go get, of course, you'd love to see a Mason Miller, but let's say a Freddie Peralta, and then, I don't know, a Senzatella and maybe someone else, and you really start to, you pick 3 pieces, you trade assets for them, and all of a sudden the team is
just get Adrian Morejon and Mason Miller. Just go get 2 guys and throw 100+. You bring up the Mets. They're an interesting fit because it's not just Freddie Peralta. It's Clay Holmes. It's Luke Weaver. It's guys that you're like, okay, they could help in a multitude of different ways. And they have a bunch of young pitching coming up. Even Bo Bichette has been questioned about possibly getting moved. The Mets are a total wild card. Another team that's a total wild card is the Boston Red Sox. Because we were talking about this 2 weeks ago. We'd be saying, I'll take Sonny Gray. I'll take Aroldis Chapman. They're not getting traded right now because they've won, 13 straight games? So now the Red Sox are in a buying capacity, likely, especially in a non-competitive AL, not necessarily a selling capacity. So that changes the market a lot.
It does. Absolutely does. I do think the Mets are in a precarious spot because of Weaver being a free agent at the end of the year and Peralta. So those, to me, I know when you get perhaps in a battle with other organizations that want the guy, you could get the bidding really high. But I do think the packages there might underwhelm, which makes me think the Cubs could be like kind of aggressive. Like if they want to take some notes from 2016 and go, no, we'll slightly overpay, but give us Weaver and Peralta. And our package still isn't crazy because we're holding on to Ethan Conrad. We're holding on to Hartshorn and some of these other huge prospects in our org. Those are the trades that you look back on most successfully, I think, where you're able to maintain the studs in your organization, but you trade from what is some depth. Like, my big question is whether the Cubs would be more willing to move Jackson Wiggins, which they weren't willing to do last year, it seemed, at least for the right price. Now, because of how strong their draft was, like, these moving pieces are all kind of layered on top of one another, where it's like, are we now at the point, even though Wiggins' stock maybe wasn't what it was last deadline, even last offseason, are we at the point where teams are more confident in him, and are the Cubs more willing to trade him? Like, there's a lot of moving parts here based on how they just recently drafted that I'm curious to see. But if they can execute a big trade, keep Hartshorn, keep Conrad, then I think that they're in a very good spot from a win now and also a long-term depth standpoint, which I think is always going to be the goal of Jed and Carter in the front office.
Yeah, Lance, it was your type of draft with pitcher, a couple more pitchers, and a couple more pitchers, right?
It was, yeah. This is my beautiful segue there that I laid up for us here. The draft was pretty wild. I think on our road to Wrigley right before the draft, you, myself, and Jim Callis, we set the over-under in the first 4 picks, I believe it was, of 1.5 pitchers taken. And they nailed it. They went 2, I believe, for the first 4 picks. But the bigger note here is they went 11 through their first 13, which is a pretty strong deviation. I believe in 2022, which was the Cade Horton draft, they did something roughly similar.
Somewhat similar.
Yeah, maybe not as heavy, but they definitely, from that 23 to 25 area, were one of the lowest 5 spend teams from allocating bonus pool money to pitching, and they completely went in the other direction from this. They got Cade Townsend from Ole Miss in an underslot deal in the first round here by a pretty big chunk of money, almost $1 million under the slot value of the 23rd pick. This allowed them to kind of defer some money to a guy like Miles Bailey, who's a massive raw power guy from Florida State, who they signed at the over slot. So again, the pool money here is always an interesting way to see how teams maneuver it into their advantage. But you guys, the fans, I'm saying you guys as in the fans, have been clamoring for pitching to be flown into this organization given the lack of depth over the last, let's say, 2 years. And my God, you got it. There's so many guys in here that I think are interesting. Morton right now is an interesting one. I think he's their 5th rounder, currently down, I believe, rehabbing, but really fun metrics on his underlying stuff. There's a Northwestern kid in here, Marianu, who's really interesting. Another guy who I just think they can add some velocity to. There's a lot of names here. Carson Yassa from Nebraska, a little bit higher floor guy who I think is going to move pretty quick, really big spin as a righty, just has some control problems. There's a lot of guys here that I think in a couple of years we'll look back on and go, yeah, this is what they needed. They had a surplus of position player talent in their farm system. You now inflow it with a bunch of arms that in a couple of years you hope are flying up to AA and AAA and are looking great. I mean, this is what we wanted, and they gave it to us. So I imagine you're happy. I'm happy with it.
It was fun because I remember us talking earlier, be like, they need pitching, and all the feedback that you were getting and saying, like, you know what, they might not take that much pitching. And then Dan Catcherman's like, Lance, we heard you. We're going to take more pitching, just like you want. And they certainly got it. I've been watching stuff with Cade Townsend and really like the stuff. I mean, Cade Townsend, though, seems like the guy that at 92 to 95 on the fastball velo, like, the ceiling's not as high, but if he can be more 94 to 96, topping out at 97, 98, like, that's a big difference maker right there. Like, you got to get the velo up for a first-round draft pick.
Yeah, he was sitting more in mid-90s, mid-94-ish. I think he was down to 92 at times. He's a little bit undersized dude, but the spin package here is really what I think they were hunting for. So I'm really encouraged with him. I think he's a higher floor pick. Like, a lot of those college arms in that pocket of the back half of the first, I would say are very similar. I think the Cubs went the route of, like, this guy could maybe debut like late next year if things go well, if not early 2028 and stuff. And I think that helps them a ton. So really fun pitching draft. The deadline stuff is something we're going to bring up on every subsequent pod here on the Cubs Now podcast. It's just inevitable because it's going to be a really fun deadline. And Alex, is always good chatting with you. We will have more for you guys here on the Cubs Now podcast coming up very soon. Take care.